about social entrepreneurship. How easy or how complicated is it to scale it?
Okay, scaling social entrepreneurship, I think, has some particular challenges that are not normally associated with a traditional for profit entrepreneurship venture. The biggest difference in my mind is there's so many people in the social entrepreneurship space, in the nonprofit space. Even the government is obviously doing social projects, and that the only way you can differentiate your project is to create a movement. And you have to start from the beginning with the idea that you're going to build a movement. OLPC did many things well, made many mistakes, but one of the things that they did particularly well is they created a worldwide movement for one-to-one computing for students. And that lesson I constantly preach. If you're going to scale a worldwide social project, you have to build a movement.
How do you build a movement? Is it important to create a good story or to be a good storyteller?
Well, if you're lucky, you're born Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela. That makes it a lot easier. There actually is now a body of work done by academicians on how to create movements. It's not voluminous, but it's starting. And I would like to think that part of the reason that it's starting is that to break through all of this information uncurated that we now live in, movements is going to be one effective way to do it. A lot of people say that in this next century, emotional intelligence and emotional skills are going to be critically important, particularly as a differentiator. Well, I think what that says then is to reach those people, you have to reach them emotionally. And then, of course, you realize that movements are the best way to do it.
Is movement related to complexity?
Oh my gosh. This is not a question that I've thought deeply about. But my immediate reaction is that movements generate self-organizing networks. And as soon as you generate self-organizing networks, you have satisfied the conditions for complexity. And for sure, these movements are built on the premise of being self-organizing. That would be a really interesting research project.
I think so.
To analyze movements from the perspective of complexity as a way to draw out the lessons. And then we could do agent-based modeling of movements, and then we'd be able to create them when we needed them. Yeah, there's probably a Nobel Prize there.
For those who don't know, what's complexity?
All right. I think that it's generally accepted that Herbert Simon, Nobel laureate in economics, was the man who gets credit for first identifying complexity in the 1960s. Later, a group of people at the Santa Fe Institute did a lot to promote complexity and continue to do it and have a wonderful online offering related to complexity science. The other institution, not surprisingly, that has a lot of credits in the complexity space is MIT.
Of course.
There's a professor there named Cesar Hidalgo who has written some very good books on complexity. I don't know if it's been translated into Spanish, but he's a Chilean. But I think complexity is an environment in which the status cannot be traced to the qualities of the individual agents. So the individual agents behaving stochastically are producing results which cannot be identified as characteristics of the agents. These systems are adaptive, which means they're constantly learning when you get to the higher order complex systems. And complexity and complexity science is used to explain things like stock markets or marketplaces, complex interactions of multiple independent players are always complex systems.
Is the book named Why Information Grows? The Evolution of Order from Atoms to Economy. Okay.
Yes.
And it is also in Spanish, El triunfo de la información, la evolución del orden de los átomos a las economías.
The book is really challenging.
I like those.
The book basically presents the notion that reality is nothing more than information and energy. So if you ever thought you had an epistemology, it's about to go up in smoke reading this book.
Which is very interesting coming from an economist, because the next question was going to be, to me, complexity is more related to quantum physics than to economy?
Well, the early thinkers in the space, like Murray Gell-Mann, who was a Nobel laureate in physics, I think they were all physicists, and they were trying to understand behaviors that they couldn't understand in the context of, for example, quantum mechanics.
Right.
That's how I think a lot of the foundation of complexity was created. But I think that in some ways, it's easier for us to understand high-level human systems like stock markets than it is to understand, the behavior of ants or something. So I think that's why we see what we see. There's an introductory book that I like very much, which is called A Guide to Complexity. And it's by a woman named Melanie Mitchell, and she's at Santa Fe Institute. And it might make sense to read her book first and then read Hidalgo.
And of course, he comes up to the conclusion that somehow everything is energy and information, which is basically what quantum mechanics and quantum physics have been saying, that we are just an hologram.
Right, exactly right. So it's nice that we come full circle.
Exactly. So just to strengthen base, everything is interconnected.
Right, and that reality is not what we call matter.
Correct, exactly.
Are you listening? Damn.